You get right in line in this case.
And then come in here and sit.
Yep, as long as you don't sit in the first two rows. That's for family. First rows here are for family. Front rows are for family. There are some available seats for family right here. This side, just this side? No.
You remember our
Yes, you can go in the back as you're sitting in the front row. Yeah, right in the back. Thank you.
Were you going to say something? Okay.
Friends, we gather together this morning to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Dr. Arthur Rosenbaum. Arthur's family so very much appreciates your presence here with them this morning, which offers them a great deal of comfort and peace.
Mismor David, Adonai roi lo echsar, minote sheyarbitzeni al me menuchot yanachaleni, nafshi yishovev, yanacheni v'magle tzedek l'ma'an shemo, gam kirelech v'gitz al mavet, Lo hirara, ki ata imadi. Shiftecha mishantecha, hemayenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorirai. Dishanta Vashem Roshi Kosir Vaya Achtova Chesed Yudifuni Kol Yamei Chayai Veshaveti Beveit Adonai Lorech Yamim.
Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the first of the Bible's 150 Psalms describes for us in language poignant and succinct the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades, and whose fruit always flourishes. Before we read together the 23rd Psalm, I want to make a comment about one aspect of its meaning. The psalm has 55 words in Hebrew. When there's an odd number in a list, we have a middle number. The middle word in Hebrew is the word atah, you. And one of the messages of the 23rd Psalm is the power of you, the power of the individual in an intimate relationship to express sorrow, to express condolences, to put our arms around the family. We have a notion in the Jewish tradition of imitatio Dei, the imitation of God and God's actions. Just as the psalm describes God as a thou, and therefore with us in times high and low, so in imitation of this idea, do we have a responsibility also to be with the family during their time of need, even if, as is so often the case, we have no words. The best we have for one another is to be together. Let's read the 23rd Psalm together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us in a very famous passage that there is a season for everything. What follows this famous passage, and is rarely read, is that though there are patterns in our lives and in the universe, we have too little understanding of what they are. And so with a certain faith that there are structures and patterns, we also face the imponderables with faith and with optimism. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Dr. Arthur Rosenbaum died this past Friday at the age of 90. He lived a long and an extremely rich life, and he made an enormous impact on everyone he touched. We will miss him. Arthur was born and raised in Lorain, Ohio, the third of 4 children and the second of 3 brothers. He graduated from Lorain High School and went on to receive his bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan with a major in English and a minor in art. 2 concentrations, which already tell us a great deal about the breadth and seriousness of Arthur's talents and passions. After Michigan, he attended the Case Western Reserve Medical School, which was followed by his internship and his residency at the University Hospital. After this, a year's focus on psychiatry, and then, and for many long years, perhaps more than 10 years in all, years of intense and rigorous preparation for a productive life as a psychoanalyst. And in the process of this painstaking preparation, Arthur grew as a professional as he grew as a person. As a result, he enjoyed a rich, productive, and varied career through his work with his patients, his deep involvement with the Cleveland Psychoanalytical Institute, serving as the head of the Institute's education committee, focusing on the training and the certification of psychoanalysts, and as a teacher at Case Western Reserve University. Indeed, these many involvements of his, all of them at the highest level of knowledge and experience and sensitivity, led to the influence he had on others and on the practice of psychoanalysis itself. As if all this were not enough, Arthur also served at one point as the interim clinical director of the Hannah Perkins Center, with its focus on child development. Now, what were the qualities which made Arthur Rosenbaum such a consummate professional? When I spoke with his wife, Marcia, and his 3 children, Debbie, Alan, and Bob, yesterday afternoon, they waxed eloquent about their father's attributes as a wide-ranging analyst. For they told me that Arthur was serious, empathetic, energetic, thoughtful, and intellectual. And Arthur's children raved about his skills as a parent. He was, they said, nurturing, caring, and emotionally intelligent. He treated his children throughout their childhood with wisdom, with humor, and with perspective. He knew how to control his own temper, and he taught his children both how to control their tempers and why it was important to do so. And here we come to a crucial element in Arthur's character, namely, his ability to emphasize the importance of dealing with one's own impulses with self-control, calmly, and especially with understanding. His children told me yesterday that when a difficult situation occurred, Arthur would encourage them to engage in a discussion about what had occurred and why, and what they could do to reduce the possibility of that occasion arising again. Conversation, reflection, learning, these were of the utmost importance to Arthur as he tried to direct his children towards sound and healthy decisions. And rather than seeing the actions and thoughts of others through the prism of his own biases and needs, Arthur always met everyone where they themselves were, not where he was at that particular moment. Arthur always tried to treat others as the unique individuals they were, not as mere functions of his own predilections. Indeed, Arthur Rosenbaum was a wonderful parent, and as a family man, as he was as a psychoanalyst, and as a grandfather as well. I heard yesterday afternoon how he interacted with each of his grandchildren as individuals, developing a unique relationship with each one of them. As one of Arthur's children said to me yesterday afternoon, yes, indeed, Arthur would sometimes bring presents to them when he came to see them, but what they cherished even more, that Arthur brought his presence himself to them. This was his real gift to his grandchildren. In addition, Arthur was a person of many other interests and skills. He loved to paint and to draw, painting landscapes with watercolors in his later years. He loved to putter in his yard, to build models, to read, to go camping. And to top it all off, he loved, and those who here know him will not be surprised, but the rest of us may be, one of the things he loved most was to trim hedges. Most likely for the rhythms of the trimming, the quiet and the relaxation it afforded him. And perhaps it was also that, unlike working with people on their problems and their prospects, a person knows with certainty when the job of trimming hedges is complete. And I heard yesterday afternoon about the special bond between Arthur and his beloved wife of 67 years, Marcia. How when they first danced together, Arthur was already smitten by this very special person. And how Marcia and Arthur adored one another, trusted one another, counted on one another. He was, you told me, Marcia, a wonderful, thoughtful man. And how lucky Arthur was to have you as his partner for 2/3 of a century. Arthur is survived by his wife Marcia, by his daughter Debbie and his sons Alan and Bob, by his son-in-law Kevin and his daughters-in-law Barbie and Barb, by his grandchildren Scott and Paula, Jesse and Andre, Michael, Matthew, David, Nikki, Kelly, and Adam. He was predeceased by his parents, Nathan and Clara, by his brothers Herbert and David, and by his sister Lois, and by his sisters-in-law Marcia and Christine. Arthur Rosenbaum lived richly, and he lived well. He raised a wonderful family, enjoyed a blessed marriage with his beloved Marcia, reveled in his multifaceted professional vocation, and found satisfaction in the many other interests that he pursued. Those who loved and admired him will never forget him. Zichrono livracha, the memory of Arthur Rosenbaum, will always be our blessing. Amen. I now want to call on each of Arthur's children in turn. They'll describe the life, the qualities, the accomplishments of their father. First, his daughter Debbie.
Wow. Okay. As I look around and I see so many familiar and loving faces, I feel overwhelmed. Thank you to everyone who's here, who traveled long distances, have interrupted vacations, who've provided us with food and stepped up to help us navigate the last few days. We could not have done it without you. All of this honors our Father, and if he were here, I believe that he'd be overcome with emotion and gratitude, as are we. Our dad was a family man, a husband, father, and grandfather. He loved to be outdoors, whether it was puttering in the yard, sailing, or camping. He enjoyed building things and fixing things. He loved clothes. He was a lifelong student, a psychoanalyst, teacher, and colleague to many, a voracious reader, an artist, and a lover of martinis, cookies of all kinds, irises, and donuts. As recently as 2 weeks ago, he was craving donuts. I'm so glad I was able to get him a half dozen to share with my mom. But Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't get you the chocolate cream you really wanted. Being a Freudian analyst in the 60s, he honored the tradition of taking the month of August off. And we were often found camping in Algonquin Park in Canada. We'd set up a base camp at Loon Lake, and then for several days at a time canoe into the interior of the park. We'd pitch our tent on an island because my mom was under the impression that bears can't swim. But she was wrong. The first night, we heard banging of pots and pans, a splash, swimming, and then repeat. Banging, splash, swim, all night, up and down the lake. But we felt safe. 5 of us in a tent, and our food hung in a tree. Watching our dad hang the food was our entertainment every night. The more frustrated he got, the more expletives were called out, and the harder we laughed. Up until his accident last week, he still enjoyed being outside, taking a walk, sitting in the park, or on the terrace at Judson Manor. But he was also a girl dad. Dads are so important to a girl, and I'm lucky to have had mine. When I was 5, we moved to the house we grew up in. Dad made me a dollhouse that looked just like our old house, so I could remember it. He also fixed that house up for my daughter so it would look like the house she grew up in. He taught me how to build models and doll furniture. As I got older and went off to college, we wrote letters. And I remember some of the advice he gave me. I don't have my letters, but I have many of his, which were filled with wisdom and humor and helped me on my way. He was there for the most significant events in my life. College, graduate school, graduations. He walked me down the aisle. He was there to meet my 3 babies when they were born. He showed up. He was my lifelong cheerleader and support. Okay, I'd like to share an anecdote from the last week of his life. And as I started to think about it, it reminded me of something that he and I shared when I was little. And I kind of felt that life had gone full circle in a way. When I was too young, this is the anecdote from way before. When I was too young to take a bath alone, but old enough to bathe myself, my dad would sit nearby and talk to me while I took a bath. And I would make soap soup for him. And before I would get out of the tub, I'd make him drink the soup. And he did, every single time. At least he pretended to. A week ago tonight, I was staying overnight in the hospital room with my dad. It was his second night in the hospital. And he began to display some signs of hospital delirium as it began to get dark. Later in the evening, still confused, he began moving his arms in a way that made me think he was doing something, but I couldn't tell what. He called my name and asked me to help him. "Dad, what do you need?" "Well," he said, "I put the chicken in the pot and added some water. Now I think I need an onion." I asked, "Are you making soup?" "Yes, I am," he said. Now, my dad doesn't cook, so it kind of made me think he was looking for comfort. How can I help?" I said. He responded, "I think it's late." It was about 3 a.m. "And I think we need to put the soup in the refrigerator and finish tomorrow." And I said, Dad, I put the soup in the fridge. And as this was going on, it brought back that old memory to me. And Dad, I really hope you aren't drinking soap soup, but I do hope you're having a delicious bowl of chicken soup. These past years, my brothers and I have had the opportunity to return the many years of love and care that he provided to us by helping him. He had become frail. He was no longer able to read due to his low vision and had occasional moments of confusion. And he dealt with these by reaching out to us, sometimes more times than we would like. But now, when I think about the future without the many phone calls, it makes me so sad. I feel a bit overwhelmed and even annoyed, I admit, by the 5th, 8th, sometimes 11th phone call in a day. Now I wish I could have just one more. I love you, Dad, and I will miss you. I'm sorry this last week was so painful for you. May you rest in peace.
Arthur's son, Alan.
Dr. Arthur Louis Rosenbaum, or more affectionately known to me as Dad, was my father, my teacher, my coach, my role model, my mentor, and more. Early on, he taught me what working and making a living was all about. He taught me by example how to go to work every day with a smile on his face and what that meant. He was passionate about psychoanalysis, his chosen profession. And this was plainly obvious to everyone around him. There was never a grumble or a negative comment about having to go to work. And in return, he did earn money, and he made a very good living for Mom and the kids, and all while doing this, something he loved. This was the first lesson I learned from him. And then I became interested in what he actually did all day while he was at work. Dad and I began to talk medical. Even when I was a boy, of course, no names or child inappropriate details were divulged. But I very much enjoyed hearing about what he did during those long daily stretches of being away from home. So he naturally instilled in me a strong work ethic. I then became interested in going to medical school and becoming a doctor, completely inspired by these conversations. Even throughout my training and beyond, we would frequently discuss cases and experiences. I have deeply cherished these conversations with Dad, and I will miss them. He was a prominent figure in the Cleveland Psychoanalytic Society for many years in the medical community, including Hannah Perkins. He wrote multiple book chapters, scholarly journal articles, and he has lectured around the world on child analysis, including Seoul, South Korea, and St. Petersburg, Russia. He was a brilliant physician with a superlative, productive career, and he helped many, many patients during his practicing years. He also taught me about hobbies and recreational activities. We camped, we sailed, we traveled every summer. He was passionate also about these activities, which I also appreciated. He worked hard and he played hard. He was also a craftsman, especially enjoyed woodworking. He made several beautiful wooden pieces, including a chess set, a coffee table, a beautiful wooden sign for his first sailboat, Hero, and as well as multiple boxes with secret compartments, which several people maybe in this room have. He was also an artist working mostly with watercolors. He painted many lovely landscapes, mostly centered around lakes, sailing, and his cottage at Lake Chautauqua. He also made several beautiful ships in a bottle, as well as a colorful, humorous book on how to build a ship in a bottle. And he loved telling jokes. Less than 48 hours before he passed away in the hospital, He told his famous potato joke to two nurses who had a good laugh. And I might add that he told the joke very well. But most importantly, however, he taught me by example on how to be a good person. He was thoughtful, caring, honest, empathetic, and loving. He led by example, and he succeeded in raising 3 children with these same ideals. It wasn't all fun and games, however. At times there were, I suppose, necessary parent-child skirmishes, but we all knew that underlying these bad times was a solid, loving foundation. We always eventually made up after a conversation about it, with a good hug and a fresh understanding of what is or is not appropriate behavior. But if you think about it, this is what being a good parent is all about, and I can say for certain that he succeeded in spades. I can only hope that I am as good a father to my boys as he was to me. And I believe that these wonderful attributes and characteristics of my father, all of the above, and probably others I did not have time to mention, were the essence of my father. Dad, thank you for all you did for me. You will live forever in my heart and my soul, and in the hearts and souls of everyone you have touched during your lifetime. You will be remembered forever.
Arthur's son, Bob.
So I have to admit I feel a little bit of pressure here. I'm made my living for the last 40 years with words and feel like I'm supposed to come up with some amazing words, and I don't know that I can. I've written this eulogy 3 or 4 times in the last 24 hours and never nailed it. So I'm just going to go back to the first thing that came out of my fingers when I sat down to type. And I hope you'll forgive me if I read a little more than I talk. I'm the youngest son of a Freudian analyst, the little buddy of a guy who thought symbolically and metaphorically, for whom everything could have multiple meanings, and if there were multiple meanings to be had, Dad would find them. People would ask me when they, childhood conversations, what's your dad do? Mine's a psychiatrist. And they'd say, oh, does he analyze you? And it's true that when we would have arguments, like in my adolescent years we did, he would sometimes try to tell me what was bothering me, and I would throw Freud right back at him, and I would say, Dad, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I'm mad because I'm mad. But we could never escape, as both Debbie and Ellen have alluded to, when we did something wrong, when we did something really wrong, we got sent to our rooms, and I now know that was mostly for Mom and Dad's benefit, so they could cool down and deal with us in a kindly way, rather than in the way that their urges might indicate. And what we dreaded most was sitting on the bed, thinking to ourselves, knowing that in a few minutes there'd be a knock at the door, and Dad would want to talk. And first of all, a closed door in our house was inviolate. If your door was closed, they knocked. If you said, go away, Dad might try to persuade me to open the door, but he wouldn't come in until I told him it was okay and I was ready to come in. And then we would sit and talk, and we would try to figure out why I was so angry, which really sucked because it was much easier to just be angry. So I like to say that Dad, and I'm going to lose, there we go. I'd like to say that Dad was the most emotionally intelligent person in my life. And I dare say that none of you will ever meet anybody who has more emotional intelligence than Dad did. He understood everything at a different level and was able to work with you in a way that helped you understand it too. He was a deeply symbolic thinker. The way he could read a book was astounding. He read Moby Dick something like 12 times. because he always got something new out of it. And even a couple months ago, he said to me he was thinking of reading it again. In his last days, last years, he was almost completely blind. He would never allow that he was blind, but I don't think he could see much more than shapes and colors in the end. So he had to listen to his books on tape, which was somnolent activity for him. He would start and then he would be asleep, and it could take him weeks, maybe even months, to get through a book. But as he did, he would talk to me about it in our 11 phone calls a day. In little dribs and drabs, he was chewing on it very slowly, and he was giving himself time to absorb the meaning of the book. And I have to admit, I didn't know what he was talking about much of the time. He was so far beyond my understanding of the same book, if I had read that book, that often I just had to either nod or agree. Most people know my dad as a serious man. He could smile, he could be charming, but he had a gravitas, and it would be a surprise to many of the people here how silly and ridiculous that he could be. His laugh was infectious, especially to himself. If he did crack himself up, it was like joyous hiccups. You never knew when it was going to end, but you knew that snot and tears were going to be involved before it did. And when he had a good laugh, he could spend the next months trying to recreate it. He always wanted to bring the same people back into the same setting and try to recreate it, because he lived for the joy of that moment when all he felt was laughter. He showed us by example that Dad's job is to nurture his children gently to independence, being gentle whenever you could, being firm when you had to, and never, ever, ever being mean, cruel, or violent. That's not something he learned from his childhood. We always knew that he had a fraught relationship with his mother, which is about the most Freudian thing that you could possibly say about a person, and which there's no doubt in our mind after some disclosures my dad made to us and apparently much of the world in the past week about episodes during his childhood that we had never yet heard before. I'll admit, it disturbed me. I'm still processing. I'm doing everything I can not to talk about it yet, because I'm not sure I'm going to talk about it appropriately. So I'm going to move on. He taught me to putter with him. We used tools all the time. Whenever Dad had tools out, I was there by his side learning how to use them with him. I've shocked myself a number of times on electrical. I've learned how close to disaster you are anytime you touch plumbing. And my dad had a special way of fixing things. He had a workshop filled with leftover odds and ends that he knew he was going to use someday, and you know what? He used almost all of them. And by the time he was done fixing something, you could tell that only Arthur Rosenbaum had fixed it. It worked. I used to call it the art of craftsmanship. He never argued with me when I said it. Dad and I learned to sail together. I learned that sailing for him started out as an escape from land, an escape from whatever goblins were living in his head. But for us together, it really became something much more. It became very symbolic of our bond together, as did the martinis. We drank gallons of them. One summer, Dad, Barb, and I had a very memorable conversation on the front porch where we actually tried to total the number of gallons of martinis that we drank together. I think we reached a number in the 50s of gallons. I'm sorry? 100.5 gallons. It's more by now. In these last couple of years, whenever I felt like I hadn't seen Dad enough, I made sure on Friday afternoon I'd quit work early, go to their apartment, and we would share a martini. I had to pour them shorter and shorter as he got older and older, and the alcohol had a more and more magnified effect. But that first sip of a martini was always a ritualistic moment for us, and he enjoyed it at least as much as I did. Dad loved his grandchildren, and he spoiled them, as the rabbi mentioned, not with presents, but with his presence, by being there while he could still get on the floor with them. He was the first to do so. He would play with them. He knew each one of them as individuals, not just as the grandchildren. And a visit by the grandchildren to see Grandma and Grandpa was always loving and joyous, and it was always about them. My dad and my mom together were an amazing thing to see. They'd been married 67 years yesterday. It was a very sad moment, and I'm sorry to even mention that. They held hands every day. The people at Judson Manor always commented on how sweet they were together and how good they were together. They could still make each other incredibly angry almost every day, right up to the end. But it was always loving, and they always made up very quickly. I always knew Dad had a difficult childhood, but it was only in his final days that he shared some new details with us. And it became very clear that at the end of his days, he was struggling with the very first questions that he was struggling with at the beginning of his days. And it's impossible for me to see all the wonderful things that came out of his life as being his journey of dealing with some early hurt, early difficulty, and not passing it on to anybody else. What he gave us was a safe, nurturing, loving, and unforgettable childhood. And the greatest gift is, that we get to pass it on to our children. And they will get to pass it on to theirs. For that, Dad, I thank you so much. And if any of you know him and miss him anywhere near like I do, give me a call. I like to say I'm 85% Arthur. And if you want to argue the percentage is a little bit higher than that, I'll go along with it and we'll have a martini together. I loved him very much and I will miss him forever.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we love. Their memories keep shining, ever brightly though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. יש כוכבים שאורם מגיע ארצה, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ונם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות מבדיל עליכם בחשכם הליל. הם שמרים לאדם את הדרך, as we live our days. These are the ways we remember.
O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody, and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. As you are able, I invite you now to rise for the El Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim, shochen במרומים, ממסה מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפך השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את נשמת יקירנו שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תחיה מנוחתו. אנא ברחמים אסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום. המשכבו ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Arthur Rosenbaum, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. You may be seated. I want to announce that the family of Arthur Rosenbaum will receive friends at the home of Debbie and Kevin Phelan at 2869 Lander Road. They will receive friends today in the afternoon from 2 to 4, and then this evening from 6 to 8, and tomorrow in the evening from 5 until 7:30. The family requests that you park on the north side of the house, either on Lander Road or on the side street, Providence Road. Our service will continue now at graveside at the Mayfield Cemetery. Once again, I hope that you realize how much your presence means to the family and to all of us at this difficult time. Thank you for being here. This concludes our service.
interment will be at the Mayfield Cemetery. We ask that those who are going to that service, please return directly to your cars, put on your headlights and your hazard flashes. Thank you on behalf of the family for attending this service. You're going to service? Yes. Park over there.